Are you considering moving in with your children after turning 70? On the surface, it may seem like a heartfelt and reasonable decision. You'll be closer to your family, get to share daily life with your beloved grandchildren, and receive care as your health starts to decline. But this decision could bring far more risks than you might expect. It may not only cost you your financial independence, but also deeply impact your mental well-being, damage your closest relationships, and eventually place you in a state of dependence with no easy way out. I'm not speaking from theory, but from real-life experience, both my own and that of people I know. One of them is Mr. Richard Thompson, a 74-year-old retired civil engineer from Portland, Oregon. After his wife passed away, Richard lived alone in the small house he had built with his hands, a home he had cherished for over 3 decades. His life was quiet, but stable and independent. He kept a consistent routine, tending his garden, playing the guitar, reading books, and occasionally walking around the neighborhood where he was familiar with every familiar face. One day, his son David visited with his wife and 2 young children and made a heartfelt proposal. "Dad, you should come live with us in Austin, Texas. It'll be easier for us to care for you, and the kids will spend more time with their grandpa. If you sell your house, we could use the money to expand the living space and share expenses." Touched by this sentiment and trusting in the strength of family, Richard agreed. He sold his house for $260,000, stored most of his belongings, and moved nearly 2,000 kilometers to Austin to live in David's new home. At first, everything seemed fine. However, within 6 months, most of the money from the house sale was gone, much spent on home renovations, credit card debt, and helping David's struggling business. Gradually, things began to shift. Richard started feeling like an unwelcome guest in what was supposed to be a shared home. He had to ask permission to have visitors, adjust to the family's daily schedule, and was often reminded to keep the noise down when playing his guitar. His grandchildren, who had once been excited to see him, were now preoccupied with school, smartphones, and their routines. David and his wife became increasingly distant, and discussing finances quickly turned tense. Most distressing of all, Richard realized he had no other options. He no longer had a home to return to, no remaining funds to live independently, and perhaps most painful, he had lost the freedom he once took for granted. "I didn't just lose my money," Richard shared. "I lost my ability to make decisions about my life. I used to be the father, the grandfather, the head of the family. I feel like a dependent child living on my son's goodwill." You may think this could never happen to you, that your children would never let you fall into such a situation. And perhaps you're right. But sadly, countless others thought the same, until they lost everything. In reality, thousands of older adults in the US and other developed countries face similar situations. It begins with a decision rooted in love. It ends in isolation, emotional harm, and irreversible loss. But you still have the chance to choose differently. Let me walk you through the 5 most serious risks older adults face when moving in with their adult children after the age of 70. And, more importantly, the practical solutions that can help you live out your later years with the independence, security, and dignity you deserve. 1. Family relationships can break, even when you think they're unbreakable. One of the most painful, and often underestimated, consequences of moving in with your adult children as you age is the potential breakdown of your family relationships. Many people believe the bond between parents and children is sacred and unshakable. However, when different generations share the same living space over a prolonged period, minor everyday frictions can build up, eventually leading to deep, unexpected conflicts. According to family therapists, up to 70% of multi-generational households experience serious emotional tension. These tensions don't usually stem from a lack of love, but rather from differences in lifestyle, perspectives, daily habits, and expectations regarding each person's role in the family. When generational gaps aren't bridged by mutual understanding and respect, even the closest family ties can wear thin, strain, and ultimately fall apart. Take the story of Margaret Ellis, a 78-year-old woman living in Seattle. Before moving in with her daughter, she and Claire, her only child, shared an exceptionally close bond. They talked daily on the phone, took weekend walks together, exchanged recipes, and supported each other like best friends. After Margaret suffered a minor fall in her bathroom, Claire suggested that her mother move in so she could care for her more easily and ensure she didn't have to live alone in her small apartment. At first, everything seemed wonderful, but within a few months, the atmosphere in the home began to change. Margaret felt like she no longer had control over her own life. She had to ask for permission whenever she wanted to go out, and was constantly reminded about minor things like forgetting to turn off lights or leaving the kitchen a mess. When she cooked, she was sometimes criticized for her food being too salty or not to everyone's taste. Once kind and gentle, Claire became irritable and impatient, often saying her mother was too fussy or always complaining. Claire's husband started coming home later and later to avoid the tension, and the grandchildren, who used to rush to hug their grandmother every afternoon, were now told to keep it down because Grandma needs to rest. The distance grew, quietly, subtly, but undeniably. After 9 months of trying to adapt, Margaret quietly packed her belongings and moved into a small apartment nearby. Yet the emotional wounds didn't heal. Her once close relationship with Claire became cold and distant. The phone calls became less frequent and then stopped almost entirely. 5 years have passed, and Margaret has not seen her grandchildren again. Claire, once her greatest source of comfort, is now nearly absent from her life. Do you believe this could never happen in your family? That love and mutual understanding would be enough to weather the challenges of living together. Unfortunately, many people thought the same, until the reality of daily life exposed the fragile limits of even the strongest bonds. So, how can this be avoided? First, it's essential to maintain your role as a parent, someone who is independent, respected, and still has a voice. When you live in your own space, your children continue to see you as an adult, not someone who needs to be monitored or managed. Spending time together regularly, enjoying meals, or helping with your grandchildren can be deeply fulfilling, as long as you have a private space to return to, where you can simply be yourself. Most importantly, ask yourself this: is the money you might save from not renting or living alone truly worth the risk of losing your most cherished relationships? Sometimes the cost of a seemingly simple decision is something you can never get back. Old age should be a time for peace, connection, and dignity, not a source of pressure or pain for you or the ones you love most. 2. Legal vulnerability and the risk of abuse, when trust alone isn't enough to protect you. One of the most silent yet deeply serious dangers that older adults face when moving in with their children is the risk of abuse, both legal and financial. It may sound hard to believe, especially in families that have long been close-knit and loving. But the truth is, this risk is 3 times higher for seniors living with relatives compared to those living independently. Why does this happen? Because when you begin relying on your children for housing, daily care, or even transportation, the line between support and control starts to blur. Under the pressure of financial stress, caregiving fatigue, or in some cases simple greed, even the kindest adult children can make decisions that seriously harm their parents, often starting with good intentions. It's just more convenient, it's for mom's good, or this will make things easier for everyone. The story of Helen Parker, a 79-year-old widow, is a heartbreaking example. After a long recovery from pneumonia, Helen was no longer physically strong enough to live alone in her small apartment in Denver. Her only son, Andrew, suggested she move in with his family in a quiet suburban town in Utah. He promised to take good care of her to ensure she could finally rest without worry. He added, "Mom, just put my name on your bank account if anything happens." Helen, trusting her son completely, agreed without hesitation. She added Andrew as a co-owner of her bank account and signed a power of attorney document drafted by one of Andrew's friends, someone she didn't really know and who wasn't a legal expert. For the first few months, things seemed to go smoothly. But when her health improved and she expressed a desire to live independently again, perhaps renting a small apartment nearby, she uncovered a shocking truth. The house she had planned to sell to fund her retirement had already been mortgaged by Andrew. Worse still, much of her savings had been quietly withdrawn to invest in his business. Helen had virtually lost control over her finances. When she brought up the idea of consulting a lawyer, Andrew became cold and distant, even cutting off basic support like groceries and transport. Helen found herself isolated in the very home she had believed would offer her safety and peace. Sadly, this is far from an isolated case. Elder law attorneys in the U.S. and other developed countries report that the majority of financial exploitation cases involving older adults originate within their own families, often because there were no clear legal documents in place, or because elderly parents placed too much trust in emotional ties without proper safeguards. So, what can you do to protect yourself? First and foremost, never add your children to your bank accounts, property deeds, or financial documents, no matter how convenient or precautionary it may seem. This seemingly harmless step can instantly strip you of your legal rights. If you need legal or financial assistance, work only with an attorney specializing in elder law, not a family friend, and certainly not based on informal advice or free services with no accountability. Furthermore, if your children are involved in your care, put everything in writing. Create a clear, written care agreement that outlines responsibilities, financial arrangements, timelines, and personal boundaries. This protects both you and your children from misunderstandings or future conflict. Trust is a beautiful thing. But when it comes to your rights, your finances, and your long-term well-being, trust must be paired with careful planning and legal clarity. Don't let love become the very reason you lose everything you've worked so hard to build. 3. Loss of autonomy. The silent killer. Few people notice. Many don't realize that, for older adults, the greatest loss isn't always money or physical health. It's the loss of the right to make decisions about their own lives. When someone who has lived independently for years suddenly has to ask permission to do something as simple as cooking a meal, inviting over a friend, or even turning on the TV in the evening, the psychological impact can be profound and deeply damaging. Geriatric specialists have long warned that the sudden loss of autonomy can lead to a host of serious consequences, from depression and anxiety to cognitive decline, and, in some cases, even premature death. When you no longer feel like an adult in your home, that helplessness slowly chips away at your dignity, sense of purpose, and physical well-being. The story of George Brennan, a 76-year-old man living in Ontario, Canada, illustrates this clearly. After losing his wife to cancer, George continued to live alone in a small cottage by the lake, a home he and his wife had cared for together for over 30 years. His days were simple, but fulfilling. Morning walks to the dock, coffee with neighbors, tending to his garden, and reading by the window. Life was quiet but peaceful and full of purpose. Concerned about her aging father living alone, George's daughter, Natalie, persuaded him to move in with her family in a suburban town nearly 500 kilometers away. She promised to prepare a fully furnished and comfortable private basement suite for him, and assured him he wouldn't have to worry about anything anymore. Wanting to be closer to his grandchildren and imagining a more relaxed life, George agreed. But within a few weeks, he felt like he was slowly being absorbed into someone else's life. Meals had to follow the family's schedule. He couldn't cook when he wanted to because the clanging of pots disturbed the kids' study time. The TV volume in his room was restricted. If he wanted to see old friends or take a walk, he had to ask if anyone could accompany him. With good intentions, Natalie began monitoring his medication, diet, and bedtime. "For Dad's health," she said. After 4 months, the once spirited, independent George became withdrawn and quiet. He stopped calling his friends. The books he once loved remained untouched. His family doctor diagnosed him with severe depression and early cognitive decline, conditions he had never shown signs of when he lived alone. George's story is not uncommon. When older adults lose the ability to make even the smallest choices in their daily lives, their sense of control begins to erode, leading to emotional and physical deterioration. The tragedy is that this process often unfolds slowly, under the guise of care and protection, making it hard for both the elderly and their families to recognize the damage until it's too late. So, how can this be avoided? The first and most crucial step is to safeguard your autonomy at all costs. If you're considering moving closer to your children, opt for a middle ground solution. Rent a small private apartment nearby, or join an independent senior living community that offers support as needed. This way, you still have access to help when necessary, but retain your freedom and sense of identity. In addition, it's important to research housing options for seniors well in advance, even while you're still healthy. Many modern living arrangements offer safety and comfort, and the chance to engage socially, stay active, and, most importantly, remain the decision maker in your own life. Don't confuse convenience with sacrifice. Allowing someone else to make every decision for you is not being well cared for. It's the slow erasure of your personhood. And in this final, precious chapter of life, you need safety, respect, and freedom. 4. Financial disaster. When moving in with your children can leave you penniless. Have you ever asked yourself, what would happen if all the money you spent a lifetime saving suddenly no longer belonged to you? Many older adults assume that moving in with their children is a smart way to save money, reduce living expenses, and gain peace of mind in their later years. But there's an unfortunate truth that few dare to confront. Countless parents have lost everything, right inside the homes of the very children they trusted most. According to the National Center on Elder Abuse in the United States, over 90% of financial abuse cases targeting seniors are committed by their family members, and adult children are the most common perpetrators. This isn't just a statistic. It represents thousands of heartbreaking stories unfolding each year, with victims being people who placed full trust in family bonds. The story of Janice Miller, a 72-year-old retired teacher from Arizona, illustrates this perfectly. After her husband passed away, Janice lived alone in a modest apartment. She had saved diligently over the years, and with the proceeds from selling her apartment for $195,000, she hoped to enjoy a quiet, independent retirement. But when her only son, Kevin, invited her to move in with his family in Oregon, she agreed. Kevin assured her that living together would cut costs, allow her to receive proper care, and help ease the loneliness. To simplify household finances, Kevin suggested that Janice deposit the full amount from her home sale into a joint bank account under their names. Trusting her son completely, Janice didn't hesitate, but within just 8 months, she noticed the balance was dropping at an alarming rate. When she asked about it, Kevin gave vague explanations. The money had gone toward paying off business debts, renovating the house to make her more comfortable, and buying a new SUV to take her to doctor appointments. When Janice finally voiced her concern, Kevin's demeanor shifted. He became defensive, even irritated, accusing her of being too controlling and ungrateful for still having a roof over her head. By the time Janice realized the full extent of what had happened, it was too late. She had no legal grounds to reclaim the money, as she had willingly signed over access to a shared account. She no longer had the financial means to move out, nor the evidence to pursue legal action. The retirement savings she had worked her entire life to build had quietly vanished. Janice's story is a powerful wake-up call. No matter how strong the family bond may seem, it can't replace clear financial boundaries and proper legal protections. The blurry line between sharing and giving away control has led many seniors down a painful path of regret, fear, and total dependence. So, what can you do to protect yourself? First, keep your finances separate at all costs. Never open a joint bank account with your children. Especially, never transfer assets like property, vehicles, or savings accounts out of convenience. Any financial contribution, if necessary, should be formalized in writing, with clear terms, signatures, and guidance from a lawyer specializing in elder law. If your goal is to live closer to your children, consider renting a small apartment, moving into a senior residence, or joining an independent living community, all of which allow you to stay nearby while retaining control over your finances and daily life. Above all, don't hesitate to seek legal advice before making any major financial decision. Regardless of who is making the suggestion, you've worked your entire life to build what you have today. Don't let love become the doorway to irreversible loss, no matter how sincere. 5. Physical and mental health decline. When the body speaks up, because the soul is no longer free. An elderly person's health doesn't rely solely on diet or medication. Daily routines in a familiar environment also sustain it, and, most importantly, the sense of control over one's life. When these are replaced by dependency, restrictions, and ongoing psychological pressure, the result isn't just fatigue. It can be complete physical and emotional deterioration. Medical studies have shown that older adults who lose their independence are at significantly higher risk for depression, sleep disorders, cognitive decline, and chronic conditions such as hypertension and heart disease. Prolonged mental stress weakens the immune system, worsening pre-existing conditions. This is especially common when a senior moves into a child's household without adequate preparation or boundaries. The story of Harold Jenkins, 77, from Brisbane, Australia, is a striking example. Once a sharp, healthy man, Harold had been managing his arthritis and high blood pressure effectively thanks to a well-balanced routine. He woke up early for walks in the park, prepared his meals, sipped herbal tea, read the newspaper, and chatted regularly with friends. His life was simple, yet it kept both his body and mind in a steady, healthy state. However, following a disagreement with his son Daniel over retirement safety, Daniel insisted that Harold move in with him and his wife in the suburbs. Daniel said his father should fully rest now and not worry about anything anymore. Not wanting to upset his son, Harold reluctantly agreed, leaving behind the independence he had cherished for many years. Harold began to feel uneasy from the very first week in the new house. The family's daily schedule was completely different. They stayed up late, ate at irregular times, and the house was often noisy due to small children. Harold could no longer go on his morning walks. The area didn't feel safe, and his son didn't have time to accompany him. Meals were cooked for the younger family members, with little consideration for his health needs. Activities that once gave Harold a sense of purpose, like cooking or tending to his plants, were replaced by idle time and a growing sense of uselessness. Within a few months, Harold began experiencing chronic insomnia, weight loss, and memory lapses. He became withdrawn and stopped engaging in conversation. A visit to the doctor confirmed the worst. Mild depression combined with anxiety disorder brought on by environmental stress. 6 months later, Harold suffered a minor stroke. His physician was clear. The cause wasn't just physical, it was largely psychological stress. You might think this couldn't happen to you, that you'd adjust. However, the aging body and mind are far less adaptable than in youth. Small disruptions, like a lost sleep routine, unfamiliar food, or the absence of private space, quietly accumulate and, over time, can lead to serious health consequences. The solution isn't to reject help from your children altogether. It's to retain control over your living environment. If you need support, consider in-home assistance services, where you can remain in your familiar surroundings with professional help without sacrificing your privacy or autonomy. And don't make major decisions without professional advice. Have an open conversation with your doctor before moving in with family, especially if you have pre-existing health conditions. Ask how such a change could affect your mental and physical well-being. Your doctor may help design a better transition plan or advise against it entirely. Senior health isn't just about pills and checkups. It's about peace of mind, autonomy, and living as your true self. Don't give that up just to keep the peace with your children. Now you've seen the 5 devastating consequences that many older adults face when moving in with their children: financial ruin, loss of autonomy, broken family relationships, mental and physical health decline, and legal vulnerability. I share this not as theory or hearsay, but from personal experience, painful, long-lasting, and deeply real. I have lived through each of these outcomes. I lost control of my finances. I gradually lost my voice in the household. I became distant from the people I loved, and I watched my health decline day by day in a place I once believed would keep me safe. These wounds don't show on the skin, but linger in the heart. And no words can fully capture the weight of that pain. But you don't have to walk the same path. You still have time to choose differently, to choose independence, to protect the wealth you worked your entire life to build, and most of all, to preserve respect, dignity, and harmony within your family. Don't let love turn into dependence. Don't mistake sacrifice for surrender. If you're considering moving in with your children, or if you're feeling pressured to do so, pause and share this message with them. Do not argue or refuse, but begin an honest, thoughtful conversation about healthier, more balanced alternatives, such as living nearby with your own space or exploring professional care options that support your freedom and well-being. Growing older is not about shrinking into silence. It is a time for rest, respect, and living fully as the person you've always been. Don't trade your precious final years for a decision made in haste. You deserve a retirement filled with peace, freedom, and the dignity you've earned.